Hey, everybody. Today we have for you podcast number 113. Today's podcast is titled, Are You Ready for the Storm? Hey, everybody. Welcome to this week's edition of your weekly Limitless Life Network podcast. We are Dr. Pete and Sandy Lombardi, and this is the Limitless Life Network podcast where we flesh out the limitations that are preventing you from reaching your goals and living the life that you are called to lead. Sandy, what do we always start out with?
Gratitude.
Yes.
And I'm chuckling because Dr. Chris, one of our top listeners, if you're listening and not watching, Dr. Pete has your hat on tonight.
Yes, and I'm repping the chiropractic first hat on tonight because it's chilly in the recording studio. We forgot to turn the heat on. And also I'm repping Josh Lewis's business co-movement. Got his hoodie on today because it's warm.
So thank you to all of our listeners and the gear that we have.
Yeah, thanks for the swag. Appreciate it. And just a really great community that we have listening in. I know that I just keep getting... I get a lot of feedback from practice members when I see them in the office. Oh, I really like this week's podcast. What you said really spoke to us. Or thank you for being bold and sharing your faith. That's just really great. So all that encouragement, man, we love it. Mm-hmm. We really appreciate it. And we appreciate you, the listener. So we would not be doing this if it wasn't reaching you in a meaningful way. So thank you for listening. All right. So let's get started. Is there anything else you want to talk about? No? Okay, great. All right, let's talk about the show. Mm-hmm. All right, are you ready for the storm? And this actually just fell into our laps today. We were both listening to Pastor John's podcast, or not his podcast, but his sermon, because we were out of town over the weekend. And Sandy stumbled on another sermon by somebody we'd never heard before. Mm-hmm. And we just took some notes on it because it was just really motivating, very powerful, really spoke to both of us. And she's like, oh, you got to check this out. This is really good. So we will do our best to curate information and pass it on to you because why just keep it to ourselves?
Right.
Right? Yeah. So let's get started.
Okay.
All right.
The first point is running from the storm.
Running from the storm. What are you talking about with storms?
Well,
what is the storm theme? What is that coming about?
So the first one is the story of Jonah. I'm sure many of you know, but so Jonah, the Lord sent him a message, very clear message of where he was to go. And he was supposed to go to a city called Nineveh. And this city was known for just being completely filth-filled city.
Debauchery.
Yeah.
Bad.
At its highest.
Yeah.
And Jonah's like, oh no, I'm not going there. I hear you clearly, but I'm not going there, and sails in the complete opposite direction to a different port. And in the scripture, it says the Lord hurled a powerful wind on the sea. So in this case, the storm appears to be directly from the Lord. And so the example that this preacher was giving was that we can be running from the Lord and his will and where he's telling us to go, and then there can be a storm that appears to get our attention.
Yeah, that's I didn't really quite grasp what he meant when he's like, God will sometimes cause a storm in your life. And I'm like, really? Like he allows storms, but yeah, in this case, he literally did. He caused the storm that was to get Jonah's attention because he had something for him to do. Mm-hmm. He had a purpose for him. And he also talked about, excuse me for coughing, I had a little phlegm in my throat. He talked about, how so many of us have really received so much from God. And and we can be on the receiving end so often that we're constantly receiving and receiving and receiving, but we're not putting out. And that was me for a long time. I can speak of all kinds of blessings that have been bestowed upon my life through the grace of God. But at the same time, I wasn't necessarily releasing that back out until I would say in the last couple of years, really releasing it out. This podcast has really been created out of that effort, and it is spun in that direction to share the goodness of God, to release it out to you, the listener, to release it out to others that are, that I don't even know, but to reach more people for Christ. Because you too may be running from a storm, and God may be bringing a storm into your life to get your attention. And I know that they have come into my life and have gotten my attention, and I don't want to run from those storms anymore. And this podcast today, I think we're going to give you some really good insight about this. I mean,
that's a good,
yeah.
I mean, a point about not just taking it in, but releasing.
Yeah. So if you're somebody that's been taking in, it's not a healthy thing to do, to just take in and to release. Like our bodies, he even talked about that. Our bodies are made to take things in, but we also release out too. And if we're not releasing, it's not an unhealthy situation. It's the same thing for us in our spiritual walk. If you're taking in, but you're not releasing out, you're not giving back. If you're not sharing, that's what you're really called to do. So I think today we'll really, we'll hit this pretty good.
Yeah.
So let's go on to point number 2.
Okay. Point number 2 is following the storm.
And the example there is?
That was the example with Jesus in the boat with his disciples when the storm hits. And Jesus is actually asleep during the storm. And Peter wakes him up, Lord, Lord, wake up. How can you be sleeping? There's a storm. We're going to die. And so the point that the pastor was making here was several. One, first, is that Jesus is sleeping during the storm.
Right.
So he was peaceful, maybe preparing what he was going to say. So like, how can we apply that to our lives? Like in a storm, in a time of crisis, can we be sleeping, quotes, can we be at peace, maybe preparing? And then the second part of that was after he woke up, he rebuked the storm. So he spoke against the storm very strongly. And it said, that he rebuked it in the way he would rebuke a demon. So, are we able to do that? So we've prepared ourselves, we've slept, and then can we be bold and stand firmly in the face of the storm?
And one of the things that he said was, "Oh, Peter, you of little faith." and he wasn't saying that Peter didn't have faith. He was just saying that his faith was small. His faith was new. His faith had not grown yet. And so there was Peter in the storm, and he was frantic. He was anxious. He was scared, all of those things. And I know that there's so many of you that have great faith. You have faith, but it hasn't grown yet, because when you're in a storm, you're frantic. You're still struggling. You're still, asking everybody to pray for you. And that's not wrong to have that happen. But at the same time, you're not at peace yet. And that will come, but it will only come when you live your faith through these storms. And that happens, and it will happen to you.
And I kind of like for myself to replace you of little faith with you of growing faith,
Right.
Peter's faith may have been little then, but we see so many examples of greater faith later on in the Bible. And that's the case for each of us. It might be little faith now, but it's getting bigger.
Yeah. And if you look into the Bible further, Peter is on trial. He's chained, and they'd already killed Stephen. They've killed James. They'd killed James. They'd killed Stephen. So literally, he's going to be on trial to be put to death. And when the Holy Spirit comes to him in the night, when the angel comes to him in the night, what is he doing?
He's
sleeping
in his jail cell. Yeah, that's right.
Yeah. So Peter's faith grew. That's the example in the storm. If you can be at rest, if you can be at peace, that you can lay your head on your pillow and go to sleep and have a restful night, and that you have to be awakened by an angel. that's when you know that your faith has grown.
Well,
Yeah.
and for us to apply that every day, we're all facing things that cause us to maybe not be able to sleep, right? So turn it over to the Lord. Have faith, and He will be with you in the next morning to face it
For
and to
sure.
stand in it.
Yes.
So, number 3 is caught in the storm.
Yeah. So caught in the storm, what are we referring to there? That would be Paul, right?
Yeah, he gave the example of Paul and what they were leaving. Where were they sailing? They were sailing. Do you remember his example?
Well,
They didn't listen to his instruction, his men. And so this was an example of kind of caught in the consequences of someone else's wrong decision. Like his men didn't follow the direction. And he was like, I told you that we were to go one way. And they didn't heed that.
right. And so they're caught in the storm, and what happens, is that the ship is destroyed.
Yeah. Yeah.
Right. So the ship is destroyed, but the mercy is on that Paul gets the men. The men, everybody survives, and that's, it has a lot to do with where is your faith? Is your faith wrapped up in the ship, or is your faith in God? And we'll get to that in a little bit.
Yeah, I guess we kind of combined these two, which is what's leaving us a little struggling. So this point is also tied to number 4. So letting go in the storm. So, and talking about forgiveness. So, and that's where he was talking about this, where they were in this bad storm and the ship is destroyed, but yet their lives are spared. And so the teaching was on that the ship could be like your job, or the title you have at your job, or your marriage, or your house. And so if the ship, any of those things I've listed, is destroyed, do you still have faith? And his point was that, yes, you have faith always, unless
your faith is in
yeah,
the ship. If your faith is in the job, if your faith is in the relationship, the marriage, right?
then you can lose your faith
Because
if that's what it's in.
Because exactly. So your faith is, if your faith is in God, that's never going away. That is a fortress. That's a stronghold. That is going to continue on forever and ever, and that's an everlasting faith, and that is something that you can count on. Whereas these other things of the world, if you have faith in those, your title, your job, your relationships, whatever it might be, those can disappear. You have faith in government. Well, that's going to change, right? That's going to let you down. All of those things can change. But if that's where your faith is, then you're going to lose it. But if your faith is in God, you will never lose that.
So that one was forgiving the cause of the storm. And that's also an important part of this is being able to forgive the what or the who caused that storm in your life. It could be someone that fired you, or a spouse who hurt you or left you, or whatever the scenario. So can you forgive the cause of that storm? And I can think of several people in my close circles who just have not been able to do that. And I just hear the pain over like decades because they can't let go of a hurt. And it was a legitimate hurt, but the only one really being affected by it now is them.
Yeah, I think of that as like it's a poison that you choose to swallow.
Yeah.
It's something that you're choosing to swallow that because you're not letting it go, and it continues to make you sick every day. That you choose to swallow it and hang on to that level of hurt and that level of like unforgiveness. But when you forgive the past and you let that go, it unlocks the future. And you have no idea what that lack of forgiveness is preventing you from, the growth and the blessings that you can deliver because you've let go of that past. And it just unlocks doors that you would never see otherwise. And that's so hard for many people to do because they don't trust in what is the future. What does God have for you in the future, right? That's that hope that we've talked about. And the only way you get there is by having faith in the present, to bring that into the present.
Yeah.
Yeah. So, yeah. And then the point number 5 is faith refined by the storm. So what are we talking about there? Faith refined by the storm. That sounds simple, doesn't it?
Right.
Yeah, it just explains itself. Faith is refined by the storm. Well, that's the example of growing your faith, right? That's with all these storms. That's when peace comes. See, God is a God of peace, and it's not a. It's interesting because Pastor talked about that, about how that peace, Jesus, the peace that God gives us, will actually stomp out the devil, right? So Satan can be stomped out by that peace. Now that sounds contradictory. It sounds like peace sounds like it's passive,
Right.
it's soft, it's gentle, and it's kind, but yet it's harsh and cruel to Satan. And that's because Satan is always trying to get you. Satan is always trying to undermine all of your peace. But when you have the peace that only comes from God, not from you, it can't come from you. When it comes from God, that's a supernatural peace. That has the power to put Satan in his place.
Yeah. And that's the word he described. Pastor said it's a powerful peace.
It's a powerful peace. And when you have that, and I think this ties perfectly together with this other pastor's sermon, is that then you have the ability to sleep in the storm. That's the peace that he's talking about. It's a peace that when trials come, when those times come, when your faith has grown to that level that you can lay your head down at night and get a good night's rest because you know in the morning your future, that it is secure. It's secure not because of what you did or what you have. It's because of what you know. It's because of what you know in the Lord, the faith that you have, that Jesus will always have you and hold you.
Absolutely. That's great.
Oh, thank you. So anyway, this was a later edition today. We pulled this off with no heat in the room because we had faith and we had to deliver. And we love and appreciate you all for listening. This is going to be a wrap, right? Yeah. Unless there's something else you want to add.
No, but as we close, I think for both of us, we've just had a lot going on, and I thought maybe we just aren't meant to do this tonight. Like we don't have a topic, and the Lord just brought this to us, and I, because we got into to listening to some sermons and led to another sermon. So if you're feeling like dry, uninspired, get into a message, like listen to the Lord's word. Listen to a sermon, and that's where you're going to get inspired. And
you know what? That makes me think of something else. When you're starting to do something really good, this is exactly what Satan wants to do. He wants to tell you that you don't have a message, that you don't have time for a message because you're busy doing these other things, and it's okay to put it off. But that's not what faith is. Faith says, no, God has us doing this for a reason, and there's a message that we need to deliver, but we're not focusing on God. That's the problem. The problem is we're focusing on all these other things, and that we need to spend some more time in His Word and listening to His Word. Let it come in so that we can send it out, so that we can release it.
Yep, being real with you.
Yep, that's the real story. That's the truth. That's it.
Have a good week, everybody.
Yeah, are you ready for the storm? I am. I'm ready. You ready, Sandy?
Yep.
Okay, that's a wrap for this week's edition of your weekly Limitless Life Network podcast. Tune in each and every week to stay connected, be inspired, and keep moving toward your best life by stripping away your limitations. And we will see you back next week.